Well, hey, welcome back. My name's Dave Dubeau, and today we're going to be talking about how to use investors' money to buy real estate. So this is super important because at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do on your own under your own financial steam. Sooner or later, bam, you're going to hit that wall. You're going to run out of cash and credit to buy more property. So we're going to solve that today by showing you how to use investors' money to buy more real estate. All right, so on today's episode, we're going to talk about the difference between joint venture partners and investors. We're going to take a look at the difference between equity investing and debt investing and talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each. And then we're going to show you exactly how to find investors and use their capital to grow your portfolio. All right, let's take a look at what is a joint venture partner and what is an investor. And this is my definition. So for me, a joint venture partner is somebody that you're working with that comes in with you to do usually one deal, and it's usually one partner per deal. Not always, but that's the most common. So for example, if you're doing a single family home type deal, you might bring on a joint venture partner who brings in the money for the down payment, and perhaps they help qualify for the financing on the property. You bring in the property, you bring in the team, you bring in the management, and you join forces. You joint venture on that property, and you both have equity ownership in that deal. The most common way to do that is a 50-50 joint venture. So after your investor gets their capital out of the deal, you split the profits 50-50. It could be the cash flow, mortgage pay down, appreciation, forced depreciation, etc. You guys share those profits equally. Now, on the other hand, an investor can be more than one. And typically, if you're thinking of an investor, it could be something like a multifamily syndication type deal where you get a bunch of investors pooling their money together. Typically, it can be smaller amounts of money, and they don't have any direct necessarily ownership in the property. They might have partial ownership in a corporate structure or something like that. Or you're bringing on a passive investor after you've got the deal up and going, and they aren't necessarily on title on the property. So for me, that's the difference between a joint venture partner and an investor. There are pros and cons to each. Typically, when you're getting into working with investors, especially pooling people's money, that's where you're starting to get in the range of the Securities and Exchange Commission if you're in the States, your local provincial securities regulator if you're in Canada. And that's where you have to tread carefully because there are lots of rules and regulations and laws around working with investors, especially if you're working with people that you don't have a pre-existing relationship with. So always make sure that if you're going to be doing something like pooling a number of people's money together, that you get the appropriate legal and financial advice and counsel before you jump right in. Otherwise, you could be crossing the line with your not so friendly securities regulator, and if you get in a scuffle with them, whether you win or you lose, you'll always lose. It's always a very expensive and painful proposition. So you want to avoid that as much as humanly possible. So let's talk a little bit about what an equity investor is. So this is typically a joint venture partner type situation. It can be getting a number of people together on a deal, and they are owners in that property. So depending on how you're doing that, it might be done directly or it might be done through a corporation. But basically, you both own part of the property. So for example, let's say you're doing a joint venture and your joint venture partner is putting up the capital and helping to qualify for the financing, and you're going to be on title as well in that property, then you might need to qualify for the financing as well. So even though they put in all the money, you are still involved in that deal, and your credit comes into play for getting the financing. So that would be a very, very clean example of equity partnership type deal. You own 50% of the deal. Your investor owns 50% of the deal. You have it in your joint venture agreement that they get their capital out first before you split up any profits over that. And it's a very, very clear understanding. So now, what are debt investors? Well, typically, these are people who invest in your deal after the fact. What do I mean by that? So let's say you go out and you buy a property. You come up with the down payment, you save up, you've got the money, you've got the credit. You go and you buy that property and you own it for a while. Let's say you're renting it out, it's a regular rental. And after a while, you decide, hey, I would really like to access my capital from this deal so I can go out and do another deal. So it's a challenge sometimes to get the bank to refinance because they're probably only going to finance the property up to 70% or 80% loan to value, but you'd like to get all of your capital out of that deal. Well, in that case, you can bring on a private investor after the fact who gets a second mortgage on that property. And let's say for ease of numbers that you've got $100,000 invested in that deal, they put on a second mortgage for that. They give you $100,000. You've got your initial investment out of the deal, and you're able to go and buy more properties with that $100,000. And now they are like the bank, but they have a second mortgage on your property. So they've got debt. You have to pay them interest every month. Perhaps you're paying them interest and principal every month as you go along, but they are not an equity owner in the property. All they get is a fixed return on their investment. They don't get any of the benefits of the appreciation of the property. They aren't necessarily seeing any of the cash flow from the property. They aren't seeing the mortgage pay down on that property. They are just getting a return on their investment. That's it. So that's exactly what a debt investor is. So hopefully now you understand the difference between an equity and a debt investor, as well as a joint venture partner or a regular investor. So this all brings to mind a client of mine. His name is Matt. And Matt does a little bit of both. He's got some equity investors and he's got some debt investors. And what he does is very, very interesting because he's done quite well for himself. He's got a successful business, so he had quite a bit of capital. He was able to go out and buy a lot of properties under his own financial steam, but then he wanted to get his capital out of those deals. So he brought on debt partners, but he did a little bit differently. Instead of just finding people that had $100,000 or $200,000 in cash lying around, he found people who had money in their IRAs, right? What is an IRA? An IRA is a retirement account, right? That's what that's all about. Individual retirement account. So he was able to find these folks who had a lot of money sitting in mutual funds or sitting in some sort of an account that wasn't getting them a very good return on their money. And he was able to get them into a self-directed kind of a program so that they could invest their money in his deals in the way of a second mortgage, like we talked about a few minutes ago. So they're able to put in their IRA money. So if you're in the States, that could be 401k or a Roth. If you're in Canada, it could be RRSP type money. And they're able to get a much better return on their money compared to what they were getting with mutual funds. They don't have the fees. They don't have the ups and downs. They get a good solid return. And Matt gets the benefit of getting his capital out of these deals so that he can rinse and repeat and go out and buy more properties. So that's a great example of how to use debt investors in your deals. All right, speaking of investors and joint venture partners and how to find them, that's what I cover in my book, Money Partner Formula. I've been doing this since 2003. I've personally raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for single-family home deals, millions of dollars for multifamily properties. And since 2013, we've worked with hundreds of private clients who cumulatively have raised well over $350 million and counting for their deals following this simple process. So if you'd like to learn how to attract investors instead of chasing after them, and how to raise 6 figures in a matter of weeks and 7 figures in a matter of months, then go ahead, get a copy of the book. You can click on the link in the description below or go to investorattractionbook.com. Go ahead, get your copy today.